Hello everybody. This week's Torah portion is Parshas Bahar. In this week's Parsha, the Torah says, Lo sonu ish es amiso. We shall not oppress or hurt another person. The Gemara says this means that we're forbidden to say things that will cause another person pain. This includes saying things that are hurtful or insulting or rude. This mitzvah relates to another mitzvah called Lashon Hara, saying negative speech. What is Lashon Hara? Lashon Hara means we're not allowed to say something derogatory about another person, which means, the Gemara says, for example, if another person did something wrong, even terribly wrong, we are not allowed to talk about it. This is true, the Gemara says, even if everyone knows about it. If everyone knows about it, if it's something that's derogatory, we're not allowed to talk about it. If it's something that's a gnai, we're not allowed to talk about something, even if everyone knows about it. Lashon Hara is also forbidden, even if it's absolutely true, even if it's an established fact. If it's not true, that's called Mosei Shemer. It's called slander and libel, which is seen as a much more severe prohibition. That's Lashon Hara. Now, this mitzvah is balanced by the fact that there are times that for the sake of helping people, for the sake of helping victims, or for the sake of helping people for the future, we are allowed to say things that are derogatory about another person for the sake of helping people. And this is true in 4 situations, says the Gemara. Number 1, to help other people. To help people, if a perpetrator did something that's terribly wrong, you want to help victims or help other people, we're allowed to say something derogatory about the perpetrator in order to help other people. Either for them past wrong or prevent them from being harmed in the future. We're also allowed to say something derogatory in order to help the perpetrator himself. For example, a person who's using illegal drugs. So we're allowed to, for the sake of helping this person using drugs, we're allowed to speak to the person's parents or other peers that can influence the person. We're allowed to do that for the sake of helping the perpetrator. Next, another example would be in order to bring people together. If 2 parties are arguing, 2 people are in a feud, we're allowed to say things that are derogatory for the sake of ultimately bringing the 2 together. And finally, the Gemara says we're allowed to say something that's derogatory for the sake of using them as an example. You tell your child, don't do this, because this is what can happen. Look what this person, look what happened to this person when this behavior was done. Now, while we're allowed to say Lashon Hara for the sake of helping people, it is limited by 7 conditions. These are called the conditions of Lashon Hara l'ta'eles. The Lashon Hara saying negative speech for a constructive purpose. Now, I'd like to share with you an important mnemonic, a memory device, to remember these 7 conditions. The mnemonic is win hate. W-I-N-H-A-T-E. Win hate. Number 1 is W. So let's say, for example, a person did something that's wrong, and we need to console the victim, console the community. So we're allowed to speak Lashon Hara for the sake of helping people, but to make sure the person did the wrong thing. We have to make sure that it isn't just a supposition, it isn't an assumption. We have to make sure there's actually a wrong done. It's wrong. I is intent. When we say Lashon Hara, for the sake of helping people, our intent has to be purely for the sake of helping people. It can't be because we enjoy Lashon Hara. It can't be because we don't like the person we're speaking about. Right? We have to do it purely for the motivation of helping people. For example, just as an example, right? There are times that Jews are allowed to eat pork. For example, if I have a medicine and then that medicine has pig ingredients, I can use it if I need it to save my life. Right? Because in that case, pork is permitted. But if it's not to save my life, if it's just purely for my enjoyment, I'm not allowed to. Here also, if I need to say Lashon Hara for the sake of helping people, I'm permitted. But if it's not for the sake of helping people, then I'm not allowed to say it. And therefore, my motivation has to be purely to help people. If my motivation is not to help people, it's like taking this forbidden thing for purely forbidden reason. That's intent. Our motivation has to be purely L'Shem Shemayim. N is not hearsay. We have to know the facts for a fact. If we just heard it through the grapevine, if it's just hearsay, then we cannot relate it as the facts. We have to know the facts. Not just that we know the person's wrong, but know the facts. That's N. H is harm. There are times when a person does something that's wrong, they deserve to be held accountable. But there are times that when we say Lashon Hara, the person may be punished in a much more severe way than they would normally deserve. For example, let's take our example of a teenager using illegal drugs. So right, if a person is using drugs and I want to help the person, help the person stop it. So I could speak to the person's parents, and hopefully the person will stop. But if I think the parents will overreact, will just freak out and punish the child much more severe than the person really deserves, and what's helpful for him, then perhaps I should use another way. I should speak to a teacher or a counselor or another mentor that perhaps can influence the person in a more judicious way. So that's harm. We have to make sure that our Lashon Hara doesn't backlash in a way that causes much more harm than a person would normally deserve. A is alternative. Before we speak Lashon Hara to help people, there are times that there are other ways to deal with it than saying Lashon Hara. For example, let's say we're at a company and we suspect that a colleague of ours is embezzling money from the company. So we could say Lashon Hara and tell the whole company this person's a thief. Or an alternative would be, maybe we speak to the controller or the treasurer and say, maybe we should audit this account very carefully. Look carefully at these books. So rather than say Lashon Hara openly, we can allude to it and find another alternative to say Lashon Hara openly. That should be seen as a first course of action rather than jumping in and saying malicious gossip. That's alternative. That's A. T is tell. There are times that people do things that are wrong and don't know that they're wrong, don't know that they're illegal, or don't see the consequences of their actions, and they don't realize it's something that's so severe. And therefore, T would be, first speak to the person before you tell the world. Speak to the perpetrator himself or herself. They may not know how bad it is. They may not know it's wrong. It's possible. And therefore, first speak to the person, and only then should we resort to Lashon Hara. This can be waived. This condition can be waived, though, if we think that if we speak to them first, they will continue to do it, just in a more surreptitious way. That's T. E is the last condition. That's exaggerate. There are times that we say something that's wrong. This person did something that's terrible, but we don't qualify it. Say how short it was. Say the duration. Say it was. So qualify how that wasn't as intense as it may have seemed. It's important, number one, not to exaggerate by leaving out information, and not to exaggerate surely by making it more dramatic and dramatizing it by adding information, adding juicy details that we don't know. So we're forbidden to leave out contextual information or to add dramatic information that in order to make our story more colorful. So those are the 7 conditions. WINHATE. Wrong, intent, not hearsay, harm, alternative, tell, exaggerates. I know it's late and this Torah minute is now far longer than a minute. But I'd like to share one further thought about Lashon Hara, and for those who are bored, you can stop the video now. The Maharal of Prague says the following. The Gemara says, mysteriously, the Gemara says that Lashon Hara is equal to all of the 3 cardinal sins put together. The cardinal sins are murder, adultery, or sexual immorality, incest, and idolatry. We have murder, sexual immorality, and idolatry. So those are the 3 cardinal sins, and Lashon Hara, says the Gemara, is equal to all 3 of them. How could this be? How could Lashon Hara be equal to these the worst possible sins? So the Maharal says the following fascinating analogy. He says, let's say I take my hand and I put it into a glove, and then I put my hand and glove into a vat of acid, corrosive acid. So eventually the acid will eat away at the glove, and eventually it'll burn my hands. But let's say I take off the glove and I put my hand directly into acid. The acid will burn much quicker and it'll have a much deeper corrosive effect. That's the same thing with Lashon Hara. See, usually when we do an avera, let's say we steal, we eat non-kosher food, we're involving our body. And so our body is sort of our shell around us, but our real us, our real core is our neshama, the part of us that existed before we were born and will continue to exist forever after we're born. It's a part of us that our true self. Our body is just like our shell, this glove. So when we do an avera with our body, when we do a transition with our body, it certainly burns the neshama, but it's muffled, it's buffered by the shell, the glove, so to speak, of the body. But when we do an avera with our neshama, it's far worse. Now the Gemara says that our power of speech comes directly from our neshama. So when we speak Lashon Hara, when we use our speech for a sin, for a transgression, the avera is being done directly with the neshama. And that's like taking the hand, putting it directly into the acid. Neshama is being submerged into this corrosive environment, and that has a far deeper and entrenched corrosive effects on our neshama, and it leaves a lasting negative effect. It makes us into much more unsensitive and less empathetic and more heartless people. It makes us far further from Hashem than doing an avera with a buffer of our body. This is a fascinating perspective on how corrosive Lashon Hara can be. May we all appreciate this lesson, and let's create a community that's thoughtful, speak sensitively, and together we help perfect the world. Have a really, really wonderful Shabbos.